milers are often a team effort rather than an individual run, because they're there to support and encourage you. And 100 miles are really, really difficult. And yes, you can do them by yourselves. And I think anybody who does a 100-miler without pacers and without crew deserves like extra kudos, because that's just an incredible feat.
Hello and welcome to Season 1, Episode 2 of Outlandish with me, Ed Scott. This podcast is all about trail running, particularly in the southeast of England. And when I think of people who make the most of living in this part of the world, Ali Whitlock is up there with the best. The Queen of Croydon, as she definitely does not want to be called, Ali is a South London-based ultrarunner who, in the last few years, has made a bit of a name for herself in the Centurion running community. She's completed a number of 50 and 100-mile races, and when she's not running, you might spot her taking pictures of runners as an official photographer at some of these events. This year, Ali ran the Thames Path 100, a pancake-flat race along the River Thames from London to Oxford. I wanted to speak to her to find out just what it takes to run that legendary distance, 100 miles. This week's episode follows a slightly different format. I wanted to find out all that I could about running a 100-mile race, so I spoke to Ali about 2 weeks before the Thames Path 100, and then again about 2 weeks after it. I've then spliced together these two conversations to create one complete episode. Unlike episode 1, both of these conversations were recorded remotely, which is still a bit of a learning curve for me when it comes to podcasting, so do bear with me if there are any slight delays or sound issues. I must admit I was a little bit under the weather for the second of these two conversations, so I do apologise if I sound a bit flat, but I definitely enjoyed talking to Ali about her experience at the Thames Path 100. She is a reserved and humble person, but she is an absolute monster when it comes to running ultramarathons. If you enjoy the episode, do give us a follow on Instagram at outlandish.run, or you can find us on Facebook, and do visit the website, which is also outlandish.run. As was the case last week, there is a bonus clip at the end of the episode, as well as a sneak preview of next week's episode. And now, Ali Whitlock. Ali, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
No worries. Where are you joining me from today?
I am currently in Croydon, South London.
Nice. You're a bit of a Croydon advocate in the UK trail running scene, from what I've seen. How long have you lived in Croydon?
Yeah, I've been in Croydon for about 14 years now, and I know Croydon has quite a bit of a bad reputation, so I always defend it. Yeah, it has its moments, but I think there's also a lot of positive things about the area. So yeah, I will always be an advocate for Croydon.
It's not necessarily an area that's sort of renowned for being outdoorsy, but actually, as anyone who follows you on Strava will know, you've got access to some amazing countryside really close to your doorstep.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I'm just slightly disappointed that it took me about 8-9 years of living in the area before I discovered quite how rural Croydon is. Just the fact that, a couple of miles from where I live, Lloyd Park, Addington Hills, that's kind of where the trails start, and from there I can get right down to past the M25, the North Downs, down to the South Downs, and even down to the South Coast, purely on trail. Barely touching road or tarmac, and it's amazing. Best of both worlds, because I can also be up in central London in 15 minutes, and I can be down on the North Downs in 15-20 minutes.
Well, we should probably mention there that you are the female self-supported FKT holder on the Vanguard Way, which is a 102-kilometre trail connecting Croydon with Newhaven on the south coast. That's right.
It is, yes.
I'm sure we could probably dedicate like an entire episode just to talking about that. But, where does that FKT sit for you in terms of your sort of running highlights?
It's probably one of my biggest highlights. It was last summer. The Vanguard Way is actually the trail that I discovered trail running on. It all started sort of like I'm a member of Striders of Croydon Running Club, and it all started probably about 5-6 years ago on a club run one Wednesday evening, and we'd just moved to our summer off-road routes, and we went on this route called the Vanguard Way, and it went through woods and down tracks and trails, and I was like, for me at that point Croydon was still very much road based, and I was intrigued. This Vanguard Way, what is it, where does it go? And it literally is where I discovered trail running. After the club run, I then went online, discovered what the Vanguard Way was, discovered where it went, and gradually, sort of like on little solo runs, started exploring a little bit further. So the club run, we probably only did about 4 or 5 miles of it out and back. So hardly touched the trail. And then I kept going a mile further. And then one day, summer of, I think it was 2016, I thought I'm gonna try and go a little bit further. I didn't really know anything about trail running at all at that point. I had no GPX files. I had no way of navigating. Let's just say that I was aiming for Edenbridge on the Vanguard Way, and I ended up near Caterham on the North Downs Way. And anyone who knows Surrey and knows either of those trails will know that they are miles apart. But it literally is where the Vanguard Way is where I discovered trail running, learnt about how to navigate, where to go, how to run on trails. Yeah, I've loved it ever since. And then last summer, it was a little bit of a impromptu attempt, and thought, well, there's no female fastest known time. Let's see if I can do it.
Guaranteed win.
Exactly.
It's an amazing Strava file, because it's a very straight trail, so you pretty much head straight down south towards the coast, so it looks absolutely epic.
I do quite like it, because it is Croydon to the south coast, and it was an amazing run. It was almost a perfect day for running as well. Not too hot, not too cold, no rain, just really good trail conditions. And I literally just set off at 5 o'clock in the morning with the intention of running the trail. All I had was that the last train back from Newhaven was, I think, at about 11 o'clock that night. So that was my kind of like goal, to get to Newhaven by the final train. And to see how far along I could get. If I could do the whole thing, great. If I couldn't, then, well, I'd just go and explore a little bit further and discover the trail a little bit more. But yeah, did the whole thing.
I'd love to talk about the Thames Path 100, but before I do that, I just want to get a sense of your running history, because you're very experienced when it comes to ultramarathons. So when did you start running, and how did that sort of come about?
Oh gosh, I started running probably about 11 years ago. No, possibly a little bit more longer ago than that. And it was just the usual thing. I did a race for life with friends. So that's one of those 5Ks. It was, I almost don't think I really ran it. I didn't train for it or anything, but I quite enjoyed it. And so from then on, I started doing a few little plods around the park. I lived over in... used to live over in Balham, and I used ones with Common, and there was a 1 kilometre circuit around the edge of the park. And I remember the first few times I went out, I had to stop 4 times doing this 1 kilometre loop. So yeah, kind of like, I would say I haphazardly jogged for a few years. And then when bought a house in Croydon, I swapped my gym membership for a mortgage, and started running properly, because people told me that running was free compared to a gym membership that costs me money. That may not quite be a true statement. And so I started running a little bit more seriously, did my first marathon in 2012, and probably you could say the rest is history. Kind of progressed from there.
A lot of people listening to this might be just starting out running ultras, or even starting out running at all. And a distance like 100 miles can seem completely out of the realms of possibility. It's a distance that I'm really only just beginning to sort of vaguely comprehend myself. And I've been running ultras for pretty solidly for about 4 years now. And even then, I'm pretty sure that running 100 miles is nothing like I'm imagining it might be. How was the process for you, sort of coming to terms with the kinds of distances that you've ended up gravitating towards?
I think in some ways it was almost accidental, and that's kind of a bit of a theme throughout all of my running. My very first marathon was accidental in the sense that I entered it 6 weeks beforehand because I'd got lost on a training run, ran 18 miles because I got lost and thought, well, if I can run 18 miles, I can do a marathon. And so went home, found a marathon, entered it for 6 weeks later and did it. Similar kind of thing with ultra running. Back in 2016, in the summer of 2016, I'd done a couple of marathons that spring. I then got myself injured. Mainly because I'd got over enthusiastic and ran too much and did all the stupid things that we all do as runners, ran through an injury and didn't run for 3 months. Whilst I was injured, I decided I wanted a new challenge, wanted to do something different. I'd recently discovered trail running and discovered the North Downs Way 50. And so entered the North Downs Way 50 on a whim. I was injured, I hadn't run for 3 months. I didn't own trail shoes, I didn't own a race pack, I didn't actually really know where the North Downs was or what it entailed, but I just decided that I wanted a bit of an adventure, and that was it. And so I did North Downs Way 50 in 2017, absolutely loved it. Had an absolute blast. My only goal was to finish, which I did, and I enjoyed the whole thing. As it goes, immediately entered more races, and then 2 years later in 2019 ended up at South Downs Way 100. It just kind of snowballed. But the thing with most of my races, or most of my first races, is that I say they're kind of accidental and impromptu, is that I enter them, but I don't actually tell anybody that I'm doing them until a few weeks beforehand. And I think that's partly kind of like, in my head, it's like this massive challenge, like 50 miles. I was like, what are you doing? That's just crazy. There's no way you can do that. And I think there's a little bit of sort of like uncertainty. And so I didn't want to go telling people that I was doing 50 miles and then not actually be able to do it. So I didn't actually tell anyone I was doing it until about 4 weeks before the race. And the same thing with the first 100 miler. It just was this absolutely crazy distance. How could I even possibly conceive the idea of running 100 miles? Let's not tell anyone, because if I don't tell anyone, then I don't have to then explain why I don't do it, because I've kind of like been a little bit over ambitious. But I did do it. So June 2019, South Downs Way 100, and as with most races like that, it was like at one point during the race I was never running again. I was giving up running. I was never ever going to do another race, never going to do another ultra. It's kind of addictive though, isn't it?
Well, it's fair to say, yeah, you've gone from strength to strength. I mean, you probably don't want to list your PBs yourself, but I've got a couple of them here. 100 miles, 21:18 at the South Downs Way 100 in 2021, which is an incredible time. 50 miles, 8:50 again at the South Downs Way 50. That seems to be a trail that you enjoy, the South Downs Way.
It is. I do love the South Downs Way, and I have actually recently just beaten my 50-mile PB.
Oh, you have?
Yeah, but it's.
Do you want to tell everyone? Go on.
Something completely different to the South Downs. The South Downs Way is I love it down there. I love trails. I've just run 50 miles on a track.
Wow.
So I did a track race, so 202 laps around the track and 50 miles in 7 hours 56, I think it was.
Oh, wow. Flying. That's awesome.
So,
that must have been an incredible experience. I was actually up in Bedford at the weekend watching the Centurion Track 100, and it was just mind-boggling to imagine running that kind of a distance on a surface like that.
I know, it was insane. It was purely, you've already mentioned Thames Path 100, and it was done purely as a mental training for Thames Path 100, because I love trails, I love hills, I love views, I love the variety of something like the North and the South Downs. That's my passion, that's what I love about running. And the Thames Path is very flat. And I was slightly concerned that it would get a little bit mundane and a little bit boring. Since recceing the route, I've discovered that it's not at all boring, but it is flat. And so the track race was purely mental training for Thames Path, sort of like trying to get myself into the mindset of just flat running, using the same muscles. time and time again, and just trying to get into that little bit of a zone that you need when you're sort of like doing the long distances. So
that makes sense.
It was an experience. Not sure if I'll do it again, but
Yeah. Good thing to try. We'll come on to Thames Path. You've placed fairly high in some races. South Downs Way 50, 10th lady in 2019 to 4th lady in 2021. 4th again at the South Downs Way 100 that same year. 6th lady at the North Downs Way 100 in 2020. Does the competitive side sort of enter into it for you, or is that sort of a happy byproduct of what you're doing?
I think it's a happy byproduct. I'm competitive with myself, and so I will go into a race like South Downs Way 100 last year, 2021, was my second go at that race, and I was competitive with myself in the sense that I wanted to beat my first attempt, because my first attempt, although I finished, wasn't the greatest of races, and I kind of felt as if I needed to beat the South Downs Way last year, and so I'd got my goals, but it was more about me and what I could do. Finishing 4th was a happy byproduct. I think there was an element where the last couple of years COVID has affected entrance to these races, and I wonder if I would have finished 4th if it had been pre-COVID, because the times were a little bit slower than when a lot of the sort of like the top women have run them. But yeah, no, I'm just competitive with myself.
Still counts.
Well, yeah.
still got the place. You document your runs on your blog, photogirlruns.blog, which I've been reading a bit over the weekend, really enjoying. I'm also a blogger, and I often feel that like a big race or a big effort isn't really fully digested for me until I've sort of written out a race report and tried to sort of put it into words. Obviously, it's kind of impossible to fully capture the experience, but I'm just curious as to why you started the blog and what you sort of get out of that.
I actually started the blog when I started training for that very first North Downs Way 50, because in my head, I was going to do 150-mile run, and I wanted to document the experience. And so I did blog my training every week, sort of like what runs I did. It also was almost blogging my way along the trail, because as I was training for North Downs Way 50, that's when I was kind of discovering trail running, and so for me it was kind of part of my journey. I never thought I would do anything else after North Downs Way 50. I don't know what made me think that, because we all know that's never the case. And so I just carried on blogging after that, but I tend to only do races and events and big things. And I think partly for me, it's partly my way of processing and capturing my memories, because you often sort of like with anything, you often sort of like forget some of the key moments and forget some of the things that happened. And it is just reminding myself of what I've done and where I've been and what I've seen, and particularly sort of like I've been doing it for the last 5-6 years. It has almost become a document of my trail journey, and how running trails has impacted me personally and my life. And there's a couple of blogs on there where I kind of like relate my journey along the North Downs Way with actually my personal story and how trail running has like impacted my life and things like that. And I find it quite therapeutic just writing, and I'd love to do more of it. Perhaps I need to do more races to give me more opportunity to write. But I do find it quite therapeutic, just as a way of capturing those memories and preserving things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a nice. I catch myself sometimes looking back through my blog, which I've had now for 3 years now, and so there's quite a lot on there. And it's nice to sort of look back. It's almost like a journal in some ways.
Yeah, even if nobody else reads it, you're exactly right. It's a journal for myself. Yeah.
I can assure you nobody else reads mine, so don't worry. We have to talk about the Thames Path 100. I've got the description here from Centurion's website, which I thought I would just read out for anyone who's perhaps not familiar with the race. Thames Path 100 is a 100-mile continuous trail race along the Thames from London to Oxford. The 100-mile course is a marked point-to-point race, which takes runners from Richmond in southwest London to the centre of Oxford. The course follows the meandering route of the Thames against its flow and is flat and fast, with the majority on groomed paths and trails and paved pathways. So today is April 25th, 2022. It is 12 days until the Thames Path 100. This isn't your first 100-miler, as we've discussed. So how are you feeling about this one?
How am I feeling? I'm actually quite excited for this, partly because I do enjoy the process of racing. I particularly enjoy Centurion races because I like the atmosphere, the people, and the event that they create. So I'm excited. I kind of want to get going now, if I'm honest. I feel ready, or as ready as you ever can be for something like 100 miles. And I'm looking forward to it. I just want to I'm in taper now, and it's that moment, that kind of time when you're in taper and you're just like, you're getting a little bit of it itchy, and you're just kind of like, yeah, I just want to get going now.
Yeah, I relate. Is this a sort of see how things go race, or let's bash out a fast time on a flat course race?
It's a tricky one. I don't race very often. You get some people who will be racing every month or twice a month. I tend to race 2 or maybe 3 times a year. And that's partly because I just love running, and so I'm happy just running and doing training runs. But it also means that when I do race, I do put a lot of energy into it, into my training, into preparation, because I want to do the best that I can at the few opportunities that I have. And so yes, I have some goals that I'd like to achieve. They're very much personal goals, because I think with anything like 100 miles, it's always very much testing to see what I'm capable of, what I can do. There's no point worrying about anyone else or what else is happening in the race. It's purely getting myself from Richmond to Oxford in the best way possible. So yeah, does that answer it?
Yeah,
without
absolutely.
giving too much away?
Yeah, well, you have the right to play your cards close to your chest. It's obviously, as you discussed, it's an extremely flat race, 1,900 feet or 580 meters, which over the course of 100 miles is essentially pancake-flat. To the unindicted, that might suggest that it's kind of an easier race, but as anyone who's run an ultra before will know, a good hill can really provide you with the opportunity to sort of take that walking break and get some food in. Has the race being flat kind of affected your training at all? You mentioned that you ran that track 50 miler. Have you been focusing on flat running?
Yeah, it's made a huge difference to my training since the start of this year. I miss the trails. I miss the North Downs Way, the South Downs Way. It's like usually I'd be down one of those places most weekends or every other weekend, but I really have focused on flat, predominantly road, because it's the easiest flat to find. I've recce'd the whole Thames Path route, so right from the start in Richmond to Oxford in 4 sections. And yeah, I have purely been focusing on flat running because I don't do a lot of it. I like hills. I'm fairly strong on hills, and I haven't really done any flat running for years, since I discovered trail. And so change of mindset, change of light approach, lots of long flat jogging. But with that, you mentioned about sort of like the variety of hills in ultras, giving you a bit of a rest and a bit of a break. What I've sort of like been finding is that particularly on the hilly ultras, going up hills, down hills, you're using different muscles. And so actually you may not necessarily get as tired because you're using a different muscle going up the hill as you are going down the hill, and then you've got the flat and then you've got the varied ground. But what I'm finding with the flat and the Thames Path training is that actually you're using the same muscles continuously, and so it's a different kind of fatigue that you're building. And so what I've actually done is I've actually built in a run-walk schedule, which I'm going to use on race day. So run a block, then have a little walk break to give the natural recovery that you'd get going up a hill on somewhere like the North Downs. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we'll see. How
useful do you think a strategic approach is to something as all engrossing as an ultra like this?
Yeah, I think there's well, for me personally, I think you have to be strategic. It's kind of like, isn't there a saying, a goal without a plan is just a dream? And so actually I've got a goal, and so to achieve my goal, I need a plan, and so I need to be strategic about it. Without that plan, my goal would be just a dream, because you'd just be relying on almost on luck. And I've trained hard for this, and so I don't want to rely on luck. And so actually the planning and the strategy is part of the running, to give me the best opportunity that I have to get to that finish line.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a time in mind that you're aiming for, or is that something that you prefer to keep sort of undisclosed?
I do have a time in mind. I might stay quiet now.
Yeah, that's fair enough. It's such an iconic course, you know. It's the Thames. It's the defining river of the south, and there's so much history associated with it. As you said, you've recce'd the whole thing. Is it a trail that you've come to love, or is your heart still in the hills?
My heart is definitely still in the hills, but I have my perception of the Thames Path has completely changed. I was quite familiar with the London end of it, so sort of like from London Bridge, well, right from Greenwich actually, sort of like through sort of like London Bridge through the city out towards kind of like Kingston area. I knew that bit quite well, and that bit, obviously a lot of it is quite urban, quite concrete, quite tarmacky. But once you kind of get past Kingston, past Hampton Court, actually it's really lovely. There are sections, I'll give you that. There are a few towns that you go through that might not be quite so lovely, but it's beautiful. It's like you're running alongside the river, you're on trail, so on mud, small woodlands, going through fields, tracks and trails, there's nature, running through the spring, sort of like seeing the flowers budding and the trees blossoming and things like that. It's, yeah, my mind has completely changed about the Thames Path. I went into it thinking this was going to be quite boring. I wasn't going to enjoy it. There'd be nothing to look at. But no, I think I'm going to quite enjoy it.
Well, by the time people are listening to this, all will have unfolded. But here and now, I wish you all the best for the race. I really hope things go your way.
Thank you.
But even if they don't, we'll have plenty to talk about when we catch up afterwards. Yeah, make sure you put your feet up for the next few days, and I look forward to seeing how it goes.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hello and welcome back to the podcast, where I am once again joined by my guest Ali. It is May 25th, 2022. It's exactly 1 month since we last spoke, and it has been 18 days since the Thames Path 100. For our listeners, no time at all has passed, but I imagine for you, Ali, it's been a pretty significant couple of weeks. How are you feeling right now, 18 days post-race?
Morning, Ed. I have to say I'm still quite tired, but yeah, the time has gone quite quickly, and it's actually been a really, really busy few weeks, and so I've not had a huge amount of time to really even think about the race that much. But yeah, quite tired. Done a couple of easy jogs to see how the legs are doing, and they're doing okay. They're doing okay.
Nice. We are going to talk about the race, and for our listeners and myself, I really want to find out as much as I can about what goes into a 100-mile effort like this. I think the best place to start, though, would be to sort of wind back the clock to the week before the race and the days leading up to it. How are those days for you? Are there any sort of pre-race rituals you like to adopt to sort of put your mind and body at ease?
Not particularly, no. I have to say I was quite strategic leading up to this race, because I put a lot of work into my training and I didn't want it to fall apart at the last minute. So I actually had a really quiet couple of weeks in the run up to it. This was partly because I was absolutely paranoid about getting COVID and not making that start line. So I deliberately sort of like stayed quite quiet in the run up to the race. Working from home, carried on my easy jogging, did a couple of sort of like sharpness sessions where I did marathon pace blocks, just to kind of like, as much for my mind as for my body, to like confirm that yes, I was ready. And then in the last couple of days, it's what we all do, isn't it? It's eating a little bit more, drinking a little bit more water, trying to sleep, which isn't always easy for someone who suffers with insomnia, and packing my kit bag approximately 27 times. Yeah, but it was I actually had a fairly laid back week leading up to the race, which was actually quite nice.
Do you tend to sleep quite well before races, or are you up all night?
I don't sleep well at all, whether it's a race or not a race.
Right.
So I actually, in the week leading up to it, I actually medicated for a couple of nights to make sure that I got sleep. Deliberately didn't medicate the night before the race because I was slightly concerned it might knock me out too much and I'd miss the start line. But I knew that sleep was important, and I knew that I couldn't go into the race not having slept well the week before. So yeah, I did medicate a little bit because I don't sleep well,
right.
Full stop.
So you arrive in Richmond, you head to the start line. Any race start is always super special, especially a 100-mile race, but it has to be said that there's something about Centurion start lines that are just even more special. The atmosphere is so brilliant, it's exciting, but not in a kind of waving glow sticks and playing loud music kind of way. It's more like a kind of friendly, energetic focus.
Yeah.
How were the early miles of the race for you?
The early miles were... It's always weird, those early miles, isn't it? Because you're standing on the start line just full of apprehension, a bit of excitement. I deliberately moved away from my friends so that I wasn't starting in a group with them because I was quite focused on what I wanted to do, and I didn't want to get caught up in anyone else's race. Those first few miles, there are people kind of like sprinting past you. There's all the excitement. For me, it was just trying to kind of like get into the groove, get into the rhythm. I run via heart rate, and so my intention was to start the race keeping my heart rate nice and controlled, so that I knew that I was not going off too hard. But it was actually quite hot on the day. Even at 9:30 at race start, it was incredibly warm, which was a little bit of a shock to the system.
I mean, it's always, a good strategy in any race to sort of go out conservatively. But, in a half marathon or a marathon, that might mean sort of taking the first couple of kilometers or the first 5K relatively cautiously. But with 100 miles, I mean, presumably it's many hours before you feel like you've banked enough miles to feel like the event is properly underway. When does that sort of start to sink in?
Oh gosh, it's probably not even until midway through the second half, like 60, 70, 80 miles. Yeah. I think my goal in my head is always get to halfway feeling okay. And then you know that you're kind of almost on the home stretch. So it is all about trying to start quite conservatively, quite steady, keeping the heart rate low, keeping the effort easy, the pace down.
You mentioned in our last chat... Sorry, go on.
No, go on.
I was going to say, you mentioned in our last chat that you were planning on adopting a run-walk strategy. Is this something you were able to stick with, at least at first?
Yes, I would run 28 minutes, walk 2 minutes, and that 2-minute walk break was also my fueling break. So I'd take on something to eat during those 2 minutes, and I did that right from the start. And it lasted up until halfway, although miles 35 to 50, I did have to add in a couple of extra walk breaks, simply because it was so flipping hot that I just needed a little bit extra kind of like recovery. But then from halfway onwards, it was very much about getting it done. And so I did need to have extra walks in the second half, which I'm a bit disappointed about because I'd have liked to have stuck to it for a lot longer. But it was very good because it did give me a focus early on in the race. And I was really strict for those first few hours. Up to 30 miles, I was very strict that my watch beeped to say 28 minutes. I stopped and walked, no matter what was going on around me.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that really helped. You mentioned the weather was difficult. Was it just an issue with the heat, or was it to do with exposure? I know parts of the Thames can be relatively exposed for long stretches.
I think it was a little bit of both. I generally run okay in the heat. I did North Downs Way 100 in 2020, which was just ridiculously hot. And even South Downs Way 100 last year was very hot. The difference with those two races is that I'd been able to acclimatise beforehand because we'd had a warm period leading up to the race. So I'd gone out middle of the day, I'd deliberately run during the hottest period of the day just to kind of get used to it. But with the Thames Path, the weather leading up to it was quite cool, not particularly warm, and so I hadn't really been able to get used to the heat. And so there's an element where on the race day, it was a shock to the system, and it was hot. The heat affects my heart rate, so my heart rate was a lot higher than I was expecting it to be. And then there are stretches of the Thames where it is quite open, quite exposed, and you're in full sunlight for long periods of time. And when your body's not used to it, it's draining. It takes a lot more energy out of you. You just become hot, sweaty. And it did actually make it feel a lot harder than it should have done.
Yeah. Was that compounded at all by we mentioned before, the race being incredibly flat? I'm just trying to imagine, sometimes on a downhill or a stretch that's a bit downhill, you can get a bit of a breeze, basically. Whereas on a really flat race, you're stuck in that kind of monotonous pattern of just every pace is the same, or every effort is the same.
Yeah, possibly. I hadn't actually thought of it like that, to be honest. But you're right. Sometimes going down a hill, you do get a nice breeze. But yeah, I guess because the intensity and the effort level was intended to be the same throughout on a flat course, you don't get those natural ebbs and flows that you would on a hilly route. So yeah, I hadn't actually thought about the flat playing a part of it too.
How did you find the flat overall? I know it was an aspect of the race that was, I guess, new for you, having not run a completely flat 100-miler before. How did that work out for you?
It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, which surprises me. Although I was... I'll mention this now, actually. It'll probably come up later on. There was a little diversion to the route because the day before the race, the Environment Agency had closed a bridge outside Henley. They hadn't actually let Centurion know. Centurion found out via Facebook, and so on the morning of the race had to put in a diversion, actually added about a mile and a half to the route. Doesn't sound a lot, but on 100 miles it is a lot. But anyway, the diversion actually went up a hill and through a woodland. Oh, wow. And I'm one of the few people who actually probably quite liked the diversion because it went up a hill, and so I got a little bit of a climb, a little bit of elevation, which actually broke up the flat quite nicely. Right. But actually, no, the flat wasn't as bad as I was expecting, and I think that's partly because I'd trained on the flat for it. I think if 6 months ago you'd put me onto a flat 100-miler, I'd have found it really, really difficult because I was just so used to hills and so used to sort of you'd take a recovery going up a hill. You'd then throw yourself down the other side, get a nice sort of nice downhill stretch, and so you had the peaks of the hills and things like that. But because I'd trained for the flat, I knew what to expect, which meant that I was able to deal with it a lot better than I expected. Now, I will say I am going back to hills pretty much straight away. I did miss them, and I missed the variety of them. But actually, it wasn't too bad. Nice.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I mean, you're a very experienced ultra runner. You've tackled the 100-mile distance a few times before. I imagine sort of going out for 20 or even 30 miles at an easy pace isn't really that big of a deal for you. But with a distance like this, inevitably there are some challenges. So how soon or late in the race did you encounter any difficulties? And what were they? Were they largely to do with the heat at first?
Let's just say the race didn't quite go as I had imagined it would or planned for it to go or even hoped that it would go. And pretty early on, I was conscious that it wasn't quite going how I wanted it to. And I mentioned earlier that I run to heart rate, and I'd trained specifically to heart rate. I knew what my heart rate should be. I knew what pace that translated into. I knew kind of how long I could maintain that for. But within the first few miles, my heart rate was elevated. It was a lot higher than it should have been, or I was expecting it to be. And I know that heat plays a part in that, but also there was an element that the higher my heart rate was, it kind of did stress me out a little bit and worried me, because I was looking at my watch going, my heart rate shouldn't be that high at this pace at this time in the race. And I was getting myself quite worked up, I think, about the fact that my heart rate was high. The effort levels felt really hard. And that was actually quite early on in the race. And I really did begin to struggle, probably around the 30-mile mark. The heat was getting to me. I was having to take more walk breaks. And I found that I, just with all the different elements, my heart rate being high, my pace was slowing, I was incredibly hot, my stomach was starting to not be happy. I found that mentally I was struggling with the race, and from probably about 30 miles, I was finding it very hard. And sort of dug myself into a bit of a hole of, I don't want to do this anymore, this is horrible, I'm hating this, why am I doing this? I think we all go through it in an ultra, don't we?
Yeah, it's almost inevitable. It's almost, your success in ultras is almost related to how well you can push through those patches. The race goes on. One of the most renowned aspects of the 100-mile distance is that for all but the very fastest runners, you're guaranteed to get some nighttime miles in. How was the experience of running into the sunset, as it were, and then running in the dark on this race?
I quite like nighttime running. I don't really mind it at all. I just kind of get on with it. I didn't really see sunset, which I was a bit disappointed about. That was primarily because it was behind trees and hidden at that time of the race. I'm trying to think about what it was, coming into Reading, I think, that the sun was going down, and just thought of the changing colours in the sky, but didn't really see it. But I quite like nighttime running. I'm quite used to it. Popped the head torch on and just kind of got on with it.
I mean, the Thames can get... Sorry, go on.
No, go on.
I was just going to say the Thames can get pretty rural in places with a head torch on and the water by your side. It must be a pretty interesting place to run at night. Yeah,
and I'm trying to kind of like think, and I guess my hesitation here is that there's part of the race that my memories are not great on, because I talked about starting to struggle sort of 30 miles in. I had a major wobble at halfway, like serious wobble, as in I sat down on the grass, refused to move, took my number off, and it took friends a good 20 minutes or so to encourage me to actually carry on. And so, because my head was in such a funk, there's parts of the race that I kind of almost don't remember. And although the nighttime miles came in the second half when I'd got a pacer with me, and I was feeling in a much better place because the temperatures had dropped, I still don't remember a huge amount about it, which kind of disappoints me in a little way, because I'm all about the experience and the memories and trying to capture that. And I think part of it is because I was just running, I was just walking, I was just moving. And it is a little bit monotonous in the sense that you're on a path by a river, and at night, obviously, you don't see all the beautiful surroundings. And I know there are areas that are really, really beautiful, but by the light of your head torch, you don't see a lot of them. And I think I was more focused on the fact that I'd got pacers with me. So we were chatting, and I possibly didn't notice as much about the surroundings during those nighttime miles. And I think partly that is because it was just a case of I was like, I need to get this done now. And my focus was purely on moving, not taking in my surroundings.
Yeah, I can understand that, especially a race as flat and as sort of, as you say, monotonous as this. At night, it must be difficult to break it up into any discernible sections. You mentioned you had pacers there who helped you out when you actually thought about giving up. How instrumental were they in this race for you?
Oh, pacers and crew were just like a major part for me. I actually say 100 milers are often a team effort rather than an individual run, because they're there to support and encourage you. And 100 miles are really, really difficult. And yes, you can do them by yourselves. And I think anybody who does a 100 miler without pacers and without crew deserves like extra kudos, because that's just an incredible feat. The pacers for me are very much more about the company. This time it was also a lot of encouragement. One of my pacers, my first pacer, John, he was due to join me at Reading. So that was 58 miles. He'd met up with Nikki, who was my crew, and just slight change of plan, they came to meet me at Henley halfway to give me some drinks and some Calippos, because I'd messaged to say that I was really hot and the heat was making it very difficult. So Nikki was like, I'll get you a Calippo and come and meet you at Henley. And I was like, great. Now Henley is halfway, and that's where I had my little one-woman sit-down protest. And as part of the getting me to move, John actually stepped in to pace 8 miles early. So he wasn't due to start until Reading, but he got his kit on, picked up his race pack and was like, right, I'm coming with you now. Right. And so he, with the diversion, ended up doing an extra 10 miles. So actually was with me for about 50k.
Wow.
And I probably wouldn't have got out of Henley if I hadn't have had him almost dragging me out. Just the encouragement, the support, the right, you can do this, right, have something to eat, come on, we're going. And then also just the talking to distract me from the fact that at that point in time I did not want to be doing this. I was quite adamant. I'd had enough. The fun had stopped. It was not enjoyable. I didn't want to be doing it. But actually the company and the conversation with pacers, it does distract your mind a little bit. And so we walked out of Henley. He was chatting away. We got into a conversation. Before I knew it, I was back jogging, and we were moving. And then before I knew it, we'd covered a mile, another mile, another mile. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm carrying on then. And so actually for this race, my pacers and my crew, and also friends who weren't officially part of my crew but actually were there supporting and encouraging, played an absolutely massive role, because I think if I'd been left to my own devices at Henley, I did take my number off because I had enough. They put it back on because I think they believed in me more than I believed in myself at that point. I didn't think I could do it, whereas they were like, you can do it. And I think that's just a massive part. And so I really do think that the Thames Path in particular, it's a team effort.
Absolutely, yeah. It's food for thought, really, isn't it? You know, just in life in general, that other people can give you that slightly more objective perspective on your own capabilities and your own
definitely,
and help lift you up.
Definitely.
Something I know from personal experience is that finish lines can be quite emotional places. Those emotions can vary from triumph and joy to tearful exhilaration, and also sometimes just a kind of numb emptiness sometimes if the race has been particularly taxing. How was your finish line experience coming into Oxford?
It was quite good, actually. I'm really pleased. One of the things I did in my training was that I recorded the entire course over several runs. And so when it came to the finish, I knew what to expect. I knew that we had a mile and a half, 2 miles kind of like on tarmac, kind of came off of the trail, went onto tarmac, running alongside the river. I had kind of like points along the river that I'd got in my mind that I knew that I had to run past. Now, my watch had already ticked over 100 miles a few miles earlier. I knew that the race was going to be long. And so there was a little bit of kind of like, well, how long am I going to go? But also, I was ready to get it done. And I actually, in the latter miles, I felt really good. When I think back to miles 30 to 50, when I was like having a horrible time, the latter stage of the race, I actually had a really good time. I felt really good. I was keeping a fairly consistent pace. I was a little bit quicker than I was expecting to be. And so those last few miles coming into the finish, I ran them. I was like, I want to get this done. I'm ready. I'm excited. I can't believe I actually got here when 50 miles ago I was sat on the ground refusing to move. And so, you run along the river on tarmac. There's a little gate in left-hand turn through a little gate into the field where the finish line is. And then, pick up into a sprint because you can see that finish gantry. And, you do it. And so
there's a very English way to finish a race, to hop through a little gate.
Yes,
and shut the gate behind you on the way in.
I think there was a marshal there kind of directing, I think, but you know how you're not quite sure because all you're focused in on is, at that point you can see the finish through gaps in the hedge and you can hear the noise of other people around. And so I think there was a marshal. I apologise if there was, and I have forgotten, that was directing us through this little gate into the field.
Yeah, I mean, something we actually haven't touched on is, Centurion aid stations and marshals are quite renowned for being just excellent in terms of the food and drink on offer, but also the volunteers who, in some cases, spend 10, 12 hours out there supporting runners. What was your experience of, just quickly, of the aid stations at this race? Did you rely on them much?
Oh, they're amazing. You're only allowed crew from halfway on the Thames Path, so the first half of the race I knew that I'd be using the aid stations. Now in my pre-race planning I wasn't going to stop at every single one because they're quite frequent. But it's amazing. You walk in, there's nearly always somebody that you know there who kind of like, they fill up your bottles for you. Do you want anything? Do you need anything? Just even little things like in the Centurion Facebook group a couple of days before the race, the person who was shopping for checkpoint 2 was like, does anybody have any special requests that they want?
Oh, wow.
I was like, can you just make sure there's bananas, because it's one of the few things that I can actually eat. And there's been a few races where they haven't had bananas and I've been a bit disappointed. And so I ran into checkpoint 2 and this girl, Ella, she was like, oh, Ali, I've got your banana for you. And it's just things like that there's almost a personalised service to a certain extent. They do look after you. It is almost, at times it feels like they are your personal crew, although they're crew for all 287 runners. And it's incredible again. It's similar to how your own crew and pacers, you can't do the race without them. We couldn't do these races without the volunteers because they just give up their time to support us. They really are incredible. And as you say, some of them do sort of like volunteering outside right through the night. And even the very last checkpoint at 95 miles, they were all stood outside cheering. I didn't stop there, but they cheered me on. They're like, right, you've got 4.5 miles to go. 2.7 of them is on rutted path, and then you're on to flat tarmac. And it was just things like that that they're our cheerleaders.
I suppose now it's time we can reveal your finish time. Do you want to do the honours?
I guess I can do, yeah. I finished in 21 hours, 12 minutes and 15 seconds, which put me as fifth lady and 34th overall.
Yeah,
so
and third in your category. It's a cracking time. How does it compare to your kind of hopes and expectations going into the race? You mentioned you had some difficult patches in this event.
Yeah, it feels a little bit, I don't want to say I'm unhappy with it, because believe me, it is an absolutely amazing time. It was a 5-minute PB, and I can't be unhappy at that time, a PB and finishing 5th. But my goal was actually 20 hours. And so I was significantly outside of my goal. And that was that middle third, sort of like 30, 35 to 55 miles, which I fell apart in. My first third of the race was great. I was bang on target up to checkpoint 2. The middle third, the less said about the better. And then the latter stages of the race, I actually gained time, and I was running really, really well in the latter stages of the race. And so it really was that heat and those struggles I had in the middle that lost it for me. And so I'm disappointed that I didn't hit my goal. I think I'm capable of it. I definitely think I'm capable of doing 20 hours. But I am really pleased with the time, and what I'm most pleased about is that I was going to stop at halfway, but actually did manage to turn it around, did get up and move again, and sort of had to dig really deep, and had a brilliant last third to kind of pull it back. From Reading onwards, so Reading was supposed to be 58 miles. With the diversion, it was closer to 60. I think that's the right way around. I gained 26 places because I was having a really good latter stage of the race. So it's kind of bittersweet in a way.
That's the shape you want your graph to be, isn't it?
It is. Just if I could get rid of that middle third of the race. But yeah, it's bittersweet. Looking at the numbers, looking at the positions, looking at how the race finished, it looks great. And if anybody just looks at the numbers, they're like, yeah, amazing. But for me personally, I'm a little bit disappointed. But it just means I'm going to have another go at some point.
Absolutely. It makes me think of that quote by Laz Lake where he says you can't accomplish anything without the possibility of failure. And I imagine having come so close to calling it quits, there must be a sort of a silver lining to having pushed through and learnt that when you thought you were at your lowest, you actually had so much more to give, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And it's all a learning experience, isn't it? It's you learn from when things don't go right. You learn, I think you probably learn more from almost failure than you do from when things go perfectly. And I know that I definitely learnt, and I will approach any future races possibly slightly differently, to hopefully have a different outcome.
Well, Ali, I want to thank you once again for lending us your time and sharing your experience with us. It's been really awesome to kind of pick your brain and get some insight into what it takes to run 100 miles. I'm still so in awe of anyone who tackles that distance or even tries to. And I can't wait to read the race report, if there is one, on your blog, photogirlruns.blog, which I once again highly recommend everyone listening checks out. What is next in the calendar for you running-wise? I know you only run or race a couple times a year. Have you got another race lined up this year? Or are you looking at 2023?
I do have a few more races, and I've actually got a few more than I usually do in my diary. I finished Thames Path 100 and then entered the Wendover Wood Night 50k, which is a completely different race, but I just kind of thought, you know what, I want something fun to do. I'm doing Lakeland 50 in July, but that is very much, that's a jolly in the lakes with friends. That's not a hard race. That's just going for the experience and just have a good time. I do have a place in Autumn 100 in October. That's as a result of volunteering there last year. I haven't decided how I'm going to approach that because I know myself and I know my body, and I don't know if I can do 2 hard training blocks in a 12-month period. So we'll see later in the year as to whether I do that, whether I just go and enjoy it, or whether I do go after my 20 hours there. Yeah, we'll see. So yeah, I've got a few things lined up, but mostly it's getting back to the trails, getting back to the hills, going out and having some fun, and just sort of like enjoying being out and about is what I'm looking forward to most over the next couple of months. Getting away from the flat. Yes, indeed. I do have one final question. Okay. Which is a question I'm asking all my guests on this podcast, and it's particularly pertinent for you, actually, given how much you've been focusing on this one specific flat environment in recent months. And that question is, what is your favourite place to run in the south of England? Oh, gosh. Now, I personally can't decide between the South and the North Downs. I love them both, and I love them both equally. I love the South Downs because it's quite runnable, and you're running by the sea, and you've got the coast, and you've got views for miles, and it's beautiful. But I also love the North Downs because that's where I discovered trail running. North Downs is kind of my home, and so the paths are familiar to my feet. I know sections of it like the back of my hand, and so it kind of like it's where my heart is. I can never decide between the two. It's like if you asked me North Downs Way 50, South Downs Way 50, I like them both. I like both trails. So yeah, either the North or the South Downs, definitely.
Nice. Well, Ali, thank you.
Sorry, that didn't really answer the question, did it?
No, that's fair enough. I struggle similarly. They're so different, and even though they're so close together, and you know they are essentially two sides of the same coin, they are so different just because of one being so close to London and one being so much more exposed. Yeah. No, I understand your dilemma.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Ali, thank you so much. And speak to you again soon.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me.
Well, there you have it. 100 miles, perhaps not the outcome that Ali was hoping for, but still an amazing time. And as she said, you learn so much from those difficult experiences. I have no doubt personally that Ali will one day return to the Thames Path 100 and absolutely crush it. Can you crush something that's already flat? I don't know, but if anyone can, Ali can. If you want to find out more about Ali's journey, you can check out her blog, which is photogirlruns.blog, or head to her Instagram, which is photogirlruns. Next week, I am so excited to bring you a chat about hats. That's right, caps, hats, headwear, whatever you call them. They are super important to many of us out on the trails, myself included. I personally never go for a run without a cap, which is why I was so excited to chat to my friend Daryl Hanstein, who founded the trail headwear company Ugoku Projects.
I don't want it just to be about the caps and that. Even if I'm running along with someone, I won't mention that I'm selling caps and things like that.
Don't carry a bunch with you.
No.
And a card machine.
No, that's something secondary to me.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the community is the thing that I really love about all of it. Just meeting people out there and just chatting with them and hearing people's stories and things like that,
Yeah, totally.
and how they got into it. And yeah, everyone's got a story to tell.
That was a clip from next week's episode with Daryl, a really great conversation that I look forward to sharing with you. There's also some bonus footage that will be posted on YouTube. Other than that, all that is left for me to say is thank you very much for listening thus far, and as promised, here is a little bonus clip about volunteering from my conversation with Ali. See you next week. I can also recommend to anyone, if you haven't before, to volunteer at a race. It's a really good way to get a different perspective on the event and just give back a little bit. I actually volunteered at Aid Station 2 last year, and it was a really cool experience because you got to see, obviously, the front runners, which I must admit I very rarely see the front runners, but also, you know, all the way through to the back of the pack and the people who are chasing cutoffs, even, you know, 20 miles in, they're chasing the cutoffs, and it's a really, you get a really different sense of the event. It's really worth doing.
Yeah, I love volunteering. I volunteered at North Downs Way 50 at the weekend just gone, and I've volunteered at, I think, most of the 100-milers at some point over the last few years. And you're right, you just do see a different perspective. I think it's also really good. I actually volunteered at Thames Path 100 before I'd run any ultra. And I did that deliberately because actually, whilst I was doing it, I was watching what the runners were doing, what they were eating, how they were behaving, and it really helped me plan and prepare for my first 50-miler, which was about 6 weeks after that. And so you kind of you learn from volunteering as well as becoming part of the community. I love volunteering. It's
also a confidence boost because you realise that, you know, the people running the race are just like you. They're not some superhuman ultra athletes. They're just regular people who've done a lot of training.
Yeah,